Welcome back, night listeners, to Nakora Nights. Nova Scotia looks calm on the surface. Small fishing towns, empty roads, fog rolling in from the sea. But if you stay long enough, you start to notice how quiet it really is. Too quiet. Tonight, we're uncovering 10 true Nova Scotia small-town horror stories. Real encounters from places where everyone knows your name and knows when you don't belong. A coastal town where lights turn on in houses, no one lives in a neighbor who knocked every night at the same time, even after they were buried. And a road that locals refuse to drive once the fog comes in. These aren't ghost stories for tourists. They're the secrets whispered behind closed doors, the kind of stories people swear are true and pray never happen again. Before we walk these empty streets together, tell me, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? Because in Nova Scotia, when the fog rolls in, some towns don't let you leave. If you're brave enough to stay until the end, hit like, subscribe, and comment below, "I hear the fog." Now, pull your coat tight, don't look out toward the shoreline, and whatever you hear knocking, don't open the door. This is 10 Untold Most Disturbing True Nova Scotia Small Town Horror Stories. Let's begin. I always thought being by myself made me strong, but I learned too late that feeling safe alone is not the same as being protected. I grew up believing silence was something you earned. My mother used to say I was born old because I never cried unless I needed something. I learned early to stay calm in quiet places and sit with my thoughts without reaching for noise. Even when I got older and moved into a rented duplex with my cousin, I enjoyed the nights she worked late because the stillness felt like a blanket. That pride, that stubborn comfort with solitude, was the reason I didn't see the danger at first. The signs were there from the beginning, but I pushed them away like shadows I refused to name. I lived in a small neighborhood on the edge of Eastern Passage, not far from Halifax, but far enough to feel like its own world. The houses all looked a little different, but were built by the same contractor. Narrow driveways, pale siding, and tiny front lawns that never grew grass the right way. People waved through their windshields, but no one really talked. The kind of place where you could walk your dog for years and still not know the person living 3 doors down. My cousin Mira and I rented this duplex together. She was older than me by 6 years, talkative, bold, always moving like she was late even when she wasn't. I was the quiet one. We split bills, shared food, argued about chores, and lived like any pair of overworked, underpaid renters who had grown too used to each other's habits. Last October, Mira told me she was going on a short trip to Toronto to meet some friends from her old job. She invited me too, but I couldn't leave work that week. She rolled her suitcase across the hallway, calling out that I should try not to burn the place down while she was gone. I joked back that she better not forget her charger like the last 3 times she traveled. She laughed, hugged me tight, and walked out into the cool morning. I watched her car disappear between the rows of faded houses and then shut the door. The difference in the house hit instantly. Not frightening, just empty, like the air wasn't stirred the same way without her. I started the first day alone by doing things I never had the time or space to do. I scrubbed the kitchen counters, rearranged the living room furniture, and turned the music up louder than Mira ever tolerated. By mid-afternoon, I was in sweatpants with my hair tied up, enjoying the rare sense of having the whole place to myself. That was the moment the knock came. It was around 2 p.m., sunny, quiet, a normal day. I had just glanced at the oven clock before walking to the door. I assumed it was a delivery because Mira was always ordering something. I didn't check the peephole. That was my first mistake. When I opened the door, a man was standing on the porch, early 30s, maybe a bit older, taller than me by several inches. He wasn't holding anything, no bag, no envelope, nothing that made sense. His clothes were plain, dark jacket even though it wasn't cold, worn shoes, faded jeans. He looked like a person you would forget the moment you turned away from him, except for his stare. His eyes locked on mine and didn't move. "Hi," I said automatically, my voice soft. "Can I help you?" He stayed silent for a moment, just long enough to stretch the air between us uncomfortably. Then he smiled, a slow, practiced smile, like he used it on strangers often. "Oh," he said, his voice low and casual. "I just wanted to see who lived here." Sorry if I bothered you. That was it. No reason, no story. He nodded once, still wearing that strange smile, then stepped backward and walked down the path. I watched him until he turned the corner and vanished. I closed the door and leaned against it, annoyed but not afraid. It felt weird, sure, but harmless. People knock on doors all the time. Maybe he had the wrong place. I told myself it was nothing. The rest of the day passed quietly. That night, though, I checked every lock twice before sleeping, just because something didn't sit right. The next morning, I went to work like usual. I convinced myself I was imagining things. By the time I got home around 5 p.m., I had nearly forgotten the knock. I was halfway through cooking dinner when there was another knock at the door. My stomach dropped before I even turned around. This time, I walked slowly to the peephole. It was him. Same jacket, same blank stare. I kept the chain on and cracked the door open just enough to speak. "Yes?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "Hey," he said cheerfully, like he knew me. "Everything all right?" The question didn't make sense. My hands tightened around the doorframe. "Yeah, why?" I asked. He gave a soft laugh like something amused him. "Just making sure, that's all." The way he said it made something crawl across my skin. I tried to smile politely. "Are you a neighbor?" I asked. "I don't think I've seen you before." "No," he answered fast, too fast. "Just walking around." Walking around twice, I thought. Both times to my door. "Okay," I said firmly. "Well, I'm fine." I shut the door before he could continue. I could feel my pulse in my ears as I listened to his footsteps fade away. I texted Mira. "Hey, did you ever see a tall guy around our place?" Dark jacket, weird stare. Her response came right away. "Nope." "You're overthinking. Lock the door and relax." I tried. I really did. But that night, every creak of the house felt sharper, like the walls were warning me. The next day passed normally. No knocks, no man. My fear began to feel silly again. Nobody wants to believe danger is real until it touches the door. Then came the last night. Mira was gone, and I had the day off. I stayed inside, watched videos, ordered food, checked the blinds every few hours without admitting to myself why. The house felt still, normal, almost peaceful. Until around 9 p.m., I was sitting on the couch when I heard something scrape against the outside wall. It wasn't loud, but it was slow and deliberate, like someone dragging a stick across the siding. My entire body froze. I walked toward the window quietly and pulled the blinds back with 2 fingers. The bushes beneath the window shook violently, as if something had just moved fast through them. I heard footsteps running away on the gravel path. My mouth went dry. A cold feeling pressed into my bones. I called Mira right away, my fingers trembling so badly I nearly dropped my phone. I tried to explain what I heard, but my voice kept cracking. That was when the knock came. Hard, fast, almost angry. "Hey," a man's voice called out. "I need help." It was him. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding so violently I could hear it. He knocked again, harder. "Please," he said. "I'm hurt. I just need to come inside for a minute." Tears blurred my vision. Everything in me screamed not to move. "Please," he said again, his voice softer, almost gentle. "I'm sorry if I scared you earlier." I didn't mean anything by it. I said nothing. He kept knocking, begging, talking through the door as if he knew me. Mira was shouting through the phone, telling me to call the police. I dialed with shaking hands. He stayed there for 5 minutes. 5 long minutes that felt like hours. He switched between sounding desperate, angry, calm, sad. Every voice came from the same man, but none of them sounded real. Then, suddenly, he stopped. No footsteps, no voice, nothing. The police came 30 minutes later. He was gone. They found footprints around the windows, deep marks near the back door, scratches on the siding where something sharp had dragged. They said they'd checked the area, but without a name or description beyond what I gave them, there wasn't much they could do. I never saw him again. But I learned later that a girl from Dartmouth had gone missing 2 days before, Last seen near the Halifax waterfront talking to a woman pretending to be from a youth shelter. A rideshare driver also reported seeing the same handler booking different silent girls on weekends, all with fake names. And a new apartment listing in town was pulling in newcomers and keeping their passports in the name of safety. I don't know if he had anything to do with any of that, but I can guess. And I can guess what he wanted when he knocked on my door. Being alone never scared me before. But now, when the house gets too quiet, when a branch hits the window or a car slows down outside, I remember his voice on the other side of the door. Calm. Patient. Waiting. Silence doesn't feel earned anymore. Silence feels like a warning. I kept telling myself that nothing strange ever truly happened in small towns like Dartmouth, yet that night proved me wrong in a way that still knots my stomach when I think about it. My friend Mason kept saying I was fading into isolation, telling me that working long hours had eaten the old me, calling me a hermit half the time. He begged me to show up at his small get-together, saying I could come for a drink, say hi, and leave whenever it felt right. That sounded harmless enough. I lived alone on the edge of Dartmouth, in a quiet neighborhood where houses looked similar enough to confuse strangers and porch lights stayed on, even when no one was home. I had been there for years. No pets, no roommates, just me and a routine that tired me out. I worked night shifts at a distribution warehouse near the harbor, a job that paid well enough, but the long hours drained my energy, leaving me exhausted most nights. My evenings were usually the same, parking my car, locking the door, eating something quick, and falling asleep with the TV humming in the background. New Year's Eve was supposed to break that routine. I drove to Mason's house close to 9, and I could hear the music before I even reached the door. The place was packed with people I had never seen before, all laughing loudly with plastic cups in hand. I drank more than I intended, not enough to forget the night, but enough to make the room feel warmer than it should. Someone kept refilling my cup, and I kept letting them. Past midnight, a sharp headache pushed through my skull, pulsing behind my eyes like a warning. I checked my phone and saw it was 1:30 a.m., written as 1:30 a.m., and I muttered that I was done for the night. Mason wanted me to crash on his couch, but I insisted on going home. I ordered a ride and left my car behind without thinking twice. That mistake almost ended everything for me. The driver dropped me off a little before 2 a.m., which my mind registered as 1:58 a.m., and the cold air slapped me hard enough to clear my vision. Dartmouth was unbelievably quiet at that hour, the kind of stillness that made the world feel hollow. No fireworks, no cars, only the distant hum of the harbor and the crunch of my steps on the icy driveway. I fumbled with my keys, dropping them once, cursing under my breath, head pounding. When I finally got the door unlocked, I stepped inside, kicked off my shoes, and tossed everything else near the entryway. I took an ibuprofen without water and collapsed on the couch, not bothering to turn on any lights. The house was dark, and so was my mind. I only focused on breathing until something like sleep took over. The doorbell pulled me back. At first I thought it was part of a dream, that half-awake space where sounds blend together, but then it rang again, short and sharp. I groaned, rolling onto my side, pressing my face into the cushion, trying to ignore it. My head felt heavy, the throbbing worse, and my brain didn't process the danger. It was almost 3 in the morning, written as 2:58 a.m., and no one rang doorbells then unless something was wrong. Then silence. After the 4th ring, it stopped entirely, and I let exhaustion pull me under again, ignoring every instinct I should have listened to. When I woke again, something felt off immediately. The house was darker than before, no streetlight bleeding through the windows. My mouth was dry, my limbs heavy like wet sand. I pushed myself up slowly, whispering to myself that I needed water, my feet dragging toward the hallway. That was when I saw it. A thin stripe of pale light cut across the wall, moonlight slipping into the house from an angle that made no sense. My stomach tightened as I realized the front door was open by a few inches, letting the night air crawl inside. I stared for several seconds, mind scrambling, asking myself if I forgot to close it, if I had actually messed up that badly. Then sound reached me. Footsteps upstairs, soft, steady, casual. I froze, panic slicing through the last bit of fog in my head. My heart slammed hard enough to make my ribs ache. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I just stared toward the stairs like I was glued in place. Another step, then another. 2 sets, moving slowly, unhurried. I whispered, "Oh no," to myself as quietly as possible and dropped behind the couch, crouching low, pressing into the shadows. My couch sat diagonally, blocking half the view of the hallway. From where I hid, I could see the stairs, but if they came close, one glance downward would expose me. I hugged my knees, willing my body not to shake, knowing any sound could give me away. The footsteps moved toward the top of the stairs and paused. Then the front door closed. The moonlight disappeared instantly. A man spoke in a calm voice, saying something that sounded like, "All right, let us begin," and hearing that made cold run through every piece of me. They thought the house was empty. That was the first thing I understood. They had checked the rooms upstairs and found nothing. They didn't see me on the couch. They didn't hear me move. They walked around confidently, opening things, sliding drawers, moving objects like they had rehearsed it. One of them laughed softly, saying people in small towns still didn't lock their doors. The other told him not to jinx anything and to grab what they needed. They talked about normal stuff, small annoyances, traffic earlier that week, a broken charger, someone named Flint who owed money. Their casual voices made everything worse. They were comfortable there inside my home. I shook uncontrollably, telling myself not to breathe too loud, not to cough, not to accidentally move something. Their footsteps came into the living room, slow and steady. Something on the table shifted as one brushed against it. Then he came closer. I felt vibrations through the floor as he stepped near the couch. He was right there. I opened my eyes just a little and saw the outline of his head above the cushion, searching between the cracks of the couch. Somehow, he didn't see me. Maybe the shadow covered me. Maybe luck hid me. He walked away after a moment that lasted forever. They finished quickly. More movement, more quiet words. Then the front door opened again and the freezing night poured inside. When the door closed, silence swallowed the house. I didn't move for a long time. Every sound made me flinch. Even the fridge turning on felt like footsteps returning. My pulse wouldn't slow, my body wouldn't stop trembling. I finally checked my phone. It was 3:24 a.m., written as 3:24 a.m., and my hands shook so badly that I almost dropped it. I waited 10 minutes, then 15 more. Only when my legs cramped did I risk lifting my head. The living room was a mess, cushions tossed, drawers open, wires hanging where my TV accessories used to be. My laptop had been taken from the desk. They had grabbed only valuable items and ignored everything else. I walked toward the front door as quietly as possible, checking the frame. It wasn't broken. That was when the truth hit me like a punch. They didn't break in. I never locked it. My mistake gave them an easy path inside. Fear swallowed me again, and I ducked behind the couch, finally calling the police. I whispered to the operator that 2 strangers had been in my home, that I was hiding, that I thought they had left. She told me to stay put, asked if I was hurt, asked if I saw them clearly. I told her I couldn't see faces. She said officers were coming. I stayed crouched until red and blue lights painted the walls and someone pounded on the door, shouting that they were police. I stood up slowly, answering them with a shaky voice. They made me wait while they cleared the house. 2 officers walked through carefully, older and younger, both serious. The older said I was lucky, saying this could have ended much worse. I nodded, still dizzy with shock. They asked questions, wrote things down, followed me upstairs. My bedroom had been torn apart, the closet opened, drawers emptied. Knowing they had stood inches from where I slept made my stomach twist. One officer pointed out that the door latch had been tested before. That made things fall into place later. The next afternoon, my neighbor, an older man named Bruce who lived across the road, knocked on my door. He said he had seen 2 people sitting in a car outside my house the previous week, but didn't want to alarm me. He assumed they were friends. They were watching my house. They were learning my routine. They knew I worked nights. They saw my car gone on New Year's Eve. When I came home in a ride instead of driving, they assumed the house was empty. The doorbell earlier had been a test. Fear lingered in me for weeks. I slept on friends' couches, flinching at small noises. I replayed the moment the stranger leaned over the couch, replayed how close they came to finding me, replayed how the smallest change could have ended me. If I had gone upstairs to sleep, if I had woken a few minutes later, if he had leaned slightly farther. I changed everything after that. I replaced the locks, added cameras, motion lights, an alarm system. I never forgot to lock my door again, not even for a moment. Even when I checked the mail, I triple-checked behind me. I got my car back the next day, but I still tense up when I hear a car slow down outside at night. The strangest part was realizing it wasn't the break-in that haunted me most. It was knowing I had been there the whole time, breathing quietly in the dark, saved only by luck. And luck always runs out eventually. I did not think twice when I accepted the new job in Sydney, Nova Scotia, and now I wish I had listened to the twist in my gut that day. I only wanted steady hours and a place that would not fall apart around me because my old job had cut shifts and my rent kept eating through whatever little I saved. I needed something predictable, something that would let me sleep without counting coins. That tiny retail shop on the edge of Sydney River looked harmless enough when I first saw it, tucked between a fading barber shop and a bakery that only seemed alive during early mornings. The small strip of stores sat lonely on a patch of cracked pavement, with a wide stretch of forest behind it and a murky river across the road. Cell signals dropped like stones after sunset, and the air turned heavy in a way that made the night feel deeper than it should. Most evenings after work, I watched fog roll in from the water and blur the streetlights until everything looked ghosted. But work was work, and I told myself I could manage a little creepiness. Locals drifted in often, familiar faces with familiar routines. The kind of people who knew each other's business without ever having a real conversation. They talked about windstorms coming off the Atlantic, complained about the potholes on the highway, and warned me that winter nights in this part of Nova Scotia could swallow a person whole. Outsiders stood out fast around here, with plates from other provinces or clothes too clean for a town that thrived on hard labor. And that was why one particular man always caught attention, even though people rarely spoke his name. He was called Rowan, but most folks just said that man down by the river. He drifted around the strip of shops longer than anyone could remember, always wearing mismatched clothes layered too heavily for summer, and walking like every step hurt him. Some said he once worked with the fishing crews. Others said he had family out on the Mira Road who stopped taking him in years ago. No one knew the real story, and no one cared to ask. People around here had learned to look away unless something was burning or bleeding. When I started, Rowan still looked human, still nodded back when someone greeted him, still asked for spare change with shaky politeness. But the longer he stayed around, the more he seemed to fade. His coat frayed, his pants dragged along the ground, and his boots split near the toes until I could see the socks inside. He stared at empty space most days, rocking slowly on the curb, though every now and then his eyes sharpened and landed on a person with unsettling focus. It was like he slipped into himself for long stretches, then snapped awake only to watch everything with a strange hunger behind his gaze. I used to bring him coffee sometimes, or bread rolls from the bakery before closing. He took them without meeting my eyes and mumbled something that might have been gratitude. I pitied him. I told myself everyone deserves some small kindness, even the forgotten ones, but pity can blind you fast. I worked mostly closing shifts. The bakery shut down at 6, the barber earlier than that, leaving me alone under flickering parking lot lights. I got used to locking the shop gate in silence, the only sound being wind scraping broken leaves across asphalt. Rowan usually kept his distance during my shifts, sitting far enough that I could pretend he wasn't watching. Until I realized he was. It began as a feeling, a weight between my shoulders whenever the sky turned dark. I would look up and catch him staring directly at me, his head tilted like he was studying something only he could see. At first, I brushed it off. People look around, people zone out. But something about his stare stuck to my skin. I started keeping my keys tight between my fingers when walking to my car, just in case. Months passed. Life settled into a dull rhythm. Then one weekend, I drove into Halifax to see a friend, hoping city noise would shake off the unease sticking to me. The atmosphere felt different there, loud, bright, crowded with students and workers and people who had places to be. I wandered down the waterfront and bought food from a truck parked near an old warehouse, thinking about nothing more than salt air and warm fries. That was when a familiar pressure landed on the back of my neck. I turned slowly, expecting a stranger, maybe someone drunk or bored. What I saw made my stomach twist so violently I nearly stumbled. A man stood behind me who looked exactly like Rowan. The same bone structure, same long face, same narrow chin, same hollow cheeks, and the same missing tooth when he smiled. But this man looked clean, polished even, with trimmed hair and neatly shaped facial hair. He wore a dark jacket that looked expensive, clean jeans, sharp boots, and a smartwatch glowed on his wrist. A leather messenger bag hung from his shoulder, and a brand new phone rested comfortably in his hand like he used it for work calls. For a heartbeat, I thought my mind had finally snapped from working alone too often. But then he stepped closer and whispered something too quietly for anyone else to hear, and my chest tightened like someone tied ropes around it. He said he knew the shop I worked at, describing the lonely little strip mall off the river road. He murmured that he knew when the snow rolled in, and when the bakery closed, and when I usually walked to my car. His voice was educated, steady, nothing like Rowan's slurred murmurs. And the more he spoke, the more my vision went fuzzy around the edges, because everything about him felt wrong in a way that made me want to run into the nearest building and lock the door. Before I could move, the food truck worker called out a name, and the man stepped forward, took a wrapped box of food, glanced at me one last time, then walked into the crowd until he dissolved like smoke. I lost my appetite after that. My hands shook so badly that I had to sit down on a low stone wall near the water. I stayed there until my legs felt steady enough to drive home. Back in Sydney, Rowan vanished for days, then weeks. People shrugged when I mentioned not seeing him. They assumed he was sleeping near the river or had wandered toward the ferry docks. But something about his absence felt wrong, as if the air itself grew tense without him. Then one morning, he reappeared. Same filthy jacket, same dragging pants, same hair tangled into mats. He sat on the curb, rocking slowly, mumbling to himself. I approached cautiously, heart beating too fast. I tried to ask if he had been to Halifax recently. He looked at me then, really looked, and a flash of something dark twisted across his face. He leaned forward fast, close enough that I could smell rot clinging to him like a second skin, and he warned me not to tell anyone what I saw in the city. His voice cracked, filled with panic and rage. He shouted that he was not homeless, that I did not understand anything, and that I never saw him. People walking by slowed, staring. I backed away and hurried inside the shop, my hands trembling until the keys fumbled between my fingers. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, Rowan was gone again. They asked a few questions and drove off, clearly uninterested in chasing a man who drifted between shadows. After that incident, sleep left me. My nights were hollow, long stretches of staring at my ceiling while thinking about the clean version of Rowan in Halifax and the filthy one screaming outside my workplace. I kept replaying the way he said he knew when I was alone. I started checking behind me when walking to my car, checking the back seat before driving, checking my apartment windows before sleeping. I heard footsteps that stopped when I stopped, smelled mint near my building even though my neighbors never used it, and once found a small rock placed neatly on my doorstep as if someone marked the spot where I lived. Calls from unknown numbers began coming around 9 or 10 every night, each with silence on the other end. I blocked them, but new ones kept coming. A month passed. Winter settled in heavy, pressing frost against windows and covering the river with thin ice. One night during a closing shift, I heard footsteps crossing the empty parking lot. When I turned, the clean version of Rowan stood near the far edge of the lights, half-shadowed, watching me calmly. He greeted me as if we had known each other for years. He talked about public spaces belonging to everyone. He said that calling the police would only waste time because they were always slow reaching this strip. I felt my pulse beat through my palms as I held my keys tightly. He said Rowan was not real, not the way people believed. He claimed that Rowan was nothing more than a shape people projected something onto, something that existed only because small towns needed someone to ignore, someone to blame, someone to treat as invisible. I wanted to walk backward into my car, start the engine, and leave without looking back, but I could not make myself move. His voice pinched something deep inside me, something that made the cold feel like it was sinking into my bones. He stepped closer, staying under the flickering light, and said he liked knowing people, learning the details of their routines, their habits, the things they did when they thought no one watched. That night, I drove home shaking. I stayed awake until 2:17 a.m., when a soft knock landed on my apartment door. 3 slow taps, then another soft knock. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number that simply read, "You are home." I grabbed my keys and fled through the back door of my building without shoes, running until my lungs burned. I stayed with a friend until morning and went straight to the police. They wrote down what I said, asked if I had been drinking, and promised to patrol the area more often. But nothing changed. They never found any clean man, never found Rowan, never found proof of anything I claimed. One officer asked if I had imagined parts of it, as if long work hours twisted reality around me. I wanted to scream at him, but all I managed was nodding. A week later, I quit my job. I moved out of the building where I felt watched every night. I changed my number. I refused to walk alone after dark. I began living with someone so the silence at night would not feel so targeted. Even now, months later, when I walk past reflective glass downtown or the windows of passing cars, I sometimes catch a glimpse of a face that resembles Rowan, not quite identical, but close enough that my stomach tightens. Sometimes when I am lying in bed at 1:43 a.m., I swear I smell mint in the air, faint but sharp, drifting under the door like a memory refusing to die. And sometimes I wonder how many people offered Rowan spare change while the clean version watched from the shadows nearby, learning their faces, their habits, their weaknesses, waiting for the moment they did not look twice. I never imagined that the calm moments in life could be the ones that trick you the most, and I had no idea how wrong I was until everything that followed. I learned too late that the quiet places are the easiest for something dark to hide in. I came to the small town of Truro in Nova Scotia after my entire life cracked apart, because I needed to breathe somewhere nobody knew my old mistakes. I had walked away from a long marriage that ended loudly, and I wanted the opposite of noise. Truro was slow, steady, almost frozen in time. People nodded when they drove past, but they did not pry. The streets felt empty even when cars were moving, and the nights were so silent that I could hear the wind brushing against the siding of my rental house. I found a single-story place at the edge of town, close to the tree line that wrapped around the back like a dark curtain. It was not pretty, not new, not special in any way, but that made me feel safe. I told myself that a plain life would keep me steady. I wanted routine, something I could predict, something that did not wake me up at night with old arguments echoing in my head. My job helped with that too. I worked at a shipping company unloading trucks, stacking crates, and doing every heavy task they handed to me. My body ached most nights, but pain made me sleep. The only part of my life that had any real color in it was my dog, a small brown girl named Maple. She weighed hardly anything and walked around like she ruled the whole street, tail high, ears sharp, eyes always scanning shadows. She had more energy than I ever did, but she also had instincts that could stop me in my tracks. She noticed things long before I did, and I should have listened to her more. That night, like so many before it, I dragged myself into the house around 7:45 p.m., dropped my boots by the door, and let my bones fall into the couch. Maple padded after me, her tail wagging slowly like she knew I had nothing left to give. I rubbed her head with a tired hand, feeling the heat of her body and the little tremble of joy she always had when she saw me. I turned on the TV and stared at the moving lights without letting any of it touch me. I ate crackers straight out of the box because cooking felt like too much work. Warm soda washed it down even though I hated the taste. My mind drifted like it always did when the day had taken too much. A little after 8, Maple got up from the rug, stretched her spine, and wandered toward the back door. She did this every night, so I did not think twice. I led her out into the small yard behind the house. The chain-link fence was old, leaning, and the grass was forgettable. The woods pushed right up to the far end, swallowing most of the light. I usually did not worry. Truro was quiet, nothing happened here. Animals wandered through sometimes, but Maple was tough and quick, and she never went far. I left the door cracked open while I rinsed dishes. That was when her barking started, not her playful sound. Not her warning sound either. This was sharp, rapid, furious. The kind of bark that made every nerve in my body twist tight. I stopped moving with a plate in my hand, unable to breathe for a second. I called her name, but she did not answer with anything except that wild, repeating bark. I stepped into the doorway, letting the cold night air hit my skin. It smelled like wet soil and old trees. Maple stood stiff at the fence, staring at a patch of darkness where the woods began. Her whole body was rigid, shaking not from fear but from the force of her voice. I tried to see what she saw, but the night swallowed everything. No sound came from the trees, no rustle, no crunch, nothing. I whispered that it was probably a raccoon, but my stomach tightened in a way that made me feel like I was lying to myself. I called her again. She hesitated for a long moment, then finally backed away from the fence and slipped inside, but her head twisted back toward the woods as if something invisible was waiting there. Inside the house, she did not calm down. She did not sit or relax or stretch. She stood at the edge of the couch and stared at the back door, her ears forward, her breath tight like she expected something to burst in. I told myself that dogs get strange sometimes. I double-checked the locks anyway. My hands were shaking a little, but I told myself it was just the long workday. I locked the windows too and tried to drown out my own nerves. By 10, I could hardly keep my eyes open. I turned off the TV and went to the bedroom. Maple followed, but instead of jumping onto the bed like she always did, she planted herself near the doorway, sitting perfectly still with her gaze fixed on the hallway. I tried calling her closer, but she did not move. I gave up and let sleep take me. I do not know what time I woke up, only that the feeling hit me before I fully opened my eyes. It felt like the air had changed, thicker, colder, wrong somehow. My bedroom door was wide open, far wider than I had left it. The hallway beyond looked darker than usual, though the house always felt dim at night. I whispered for Maple, but nothing answered. Not a paw step, not a shake of her collar, not even a breath. A cold wave rolled through me. I swung my legs over the bed and stepped into the hallway, trying to make as little sound as possible. The house felt too still, like something held its breath along with me. I moved down the stairs, almost tiptoeing, even though the old wood creaked no matter what. The living room looked untouched. The couch, the shoes, the blanket draped over the armrest, everything was exactly how I had left it. That normality made it worse, as if the quiet was pretending too much. I walked into the kitchen. Maple's food bowl was full. Her water did not have a single ripple. My stomach dropped hard, like I had swallowed a stone. I whispered her name again, this time my voice cracking. That was when I saw her under the table. She was pressed flat to the floor, shaking so hard I could hear her claws tapping the tile. Her eyes were wide, locked on me, but not with relief. With terror. She looked like she wanted to run but had nowhere left to go. I went to her slowly, trying to calm her with my voice, but she stayed frozen. Then I noticed what she was looking at behind me. The back door was not cracked open anymore. It was fully open, swinging gently, letting cold air flood the kitchen. The smell of the woods was strong, sharp, too close. I felt the blood leave my face. Someone had been in the house. My mind did not scream. It went quiet in a way that scared me more than any sound could have. I grabbed Maple and ran out the door, across the yard, through the old gate, and straight toward the neighbor's house. My bare feet slapped the concrete, cold and painful, but I did not stop. When my neighbor opened the door, they saw something in my face that made them forget every question. They called the police while I held Maple close, feeling her trembling against me. Officers arrived fast, but I already knew they would not find anyone. They walked through my house with flashlights, checking corners, checking closets, checking under furniture. They found only traces, but those traces were enough to make my skin crawl. There were footprints in the dirt outside the back door, footprints leading onto the porch, footprints inside the hallway, and even upstairs. Someone had been walking around my house while I slept just steps away. I did not know how long they had been there. I did not know where they hid while I searched for Maple. I did not know why they left the door wide open, as if inviting me to follow. But that was not the part that kept me awake after that night. What stayed in my head was Maple's behavior. She knew. She sensed something before it ever stepped through the door. Something that made her bark like she had never barked before. Something that made her hide under the table even after the house went silent again. I should have listened to her. In the following days, the police kept looking into strange activity around Truro. Someone reported seeing a shadowy figure near the bus station, where security cameras captured a strange exchange. A person calmly handing something off to another person at a bus stop with no panic, no fight, nothing. Another report came from a motel cleaner who found several identification cards hidden in the ceiling tiles, all belonging to people who had checked into different rooms under different names. Then there were whispers about a local church donation drive quietly steering lost teenagers towards shady work programs that no one ever returned from. All of it added up to something I did not want to think about. Something that made the quiet town of Truro feel like it had shadows inside shadows, all moving with silent steps even during the day. I moved out a few weeks later. I could not stay in that house anymore. Maple never went near the back door again. She would whine whenever we passed through that part of town. I never slept the same after that night. And the worst part is that nobody ever figured out who walked through my house or why. They just left signs, footsteps, open doors, and cold air. Sometimes I still wake up convinced that I hear something shifting in the hallway, soft and patient, waiting for me to breathe too loud. I keep my doors locked now. I keep my windows closed. I check them more times than I should, but every so often, when the wind blows just right, I swear I smell the woods again, drifting into my new home like an old memory that refuses to leave. And I know deep down that whoever walked through my house that night did not do it for the first time, and they did not do it for the last time either. I never thought silence could feel dangerous, but I learned that lesson the hard way. Before everything went wrong, I lived a quiet life in New Glasgow, a small town in Nova Scotia, where most people waved at each other from their porches and kids rode bikes across cracked gray sidewalks until the sky turned dark blue. I grew up thinking nothing bad ever happened there. I wish I had been right. People used to say my family had a strange house, though I didn't see it that way when I was young. It stood on a corner lot, a little older than the others, with chipped paint and a shape that made it look like it was watching the street. My room was upstairs beside my mother's, and both of our rooms opened onto a narrow balcony with long glass doors covered by thin curtains. On windy days, they fluttered like someone was walking past them, and when I was small, I used to pretend ghosts lived there. I never imagined I would end up wishing ghosts were the only things to fear. The balcony had 2 tall trees beside it, their branches stretching so close that you could climb onto the railing without even trying. I used to climb one of them when I was younger, pretending I was sneaking out like in movies, but my mom snapped at me once and told me I was going to break my neck. After that, I stopped climbing. The tree didn't stop being close. It didn't stop being a perfect ladder for someone who wanted to get upstairs without using the front door. Back then, people thought I was the kind of kid who never got into trouble. I was quiet and spent more time reading than hanging out with friends. My mom worked long hours as a caregiver for seniors, and I helped with my younger brother every day after school. When she had shifts that ran late, I was used to being home without any adults around. I didn't mind. It made me feel older, like I had a bit more control than I actually did. But a few months before that awful night, something strange happened that should have been a warning. I saw an ad for a childcare job pinned to the board at the grocery store downtown. It sounded perfect. A couple looking for part-time help, flexible hours, good pay. They said they had excellent references from families in Halifax. When I called the number, a woman answered. She sounded so warm and friendly that I trusted her instantly. She said she and her husband were new to the area and needed someone responsible. I didn't realize then that every reference they sent me was fake. Later, police told us the names didn't match any registered families, any addresses, any real people at all. But I didn't take the job. Something felt off when the husband kept sending messages about how I seemed mature for my age and how they could mentor me. I blocked the number. I stopped thinking about it. I thought it was nothing. I didn't know they had my address from the resume I had sent. I didn't know the danger had already found its way to me. The night everything changed began like any other. My mom took my brother to stay with my aunt on the other side of New Glasgow because my aunt needed help early the next morning. I had school the next day, so I stayed home. It felt normal, even peaceful. I had an old clip-on light attached to my book, and the rest of my room was dark, except for the soft yellow glow drifting through the curtains from the street lamp outside. It painted long shapes on the floor like stripes. Around that time, something else had been happening in town. A girl who lived a few blocks from my school had gone missing 3 weeks earlier. Her parents were desperate. Everyone was talking about it. Some people said they saw a truck following her around. Others said she ran away. But the strangest part was her phone kept receiving threatening messages from people demanding money, even though she was gone. Debt from things she never bought, people she never met. Police said her accounts had been hacked, but no one knew why. Her case was the first thing I thought of when I heard the sound outside my window that night. At first, I ignored it. We had raccoons and stray cats that sometimes jumped between the branches. I told myself it was just the wind, even though the night was still and silent. I kept reading until I heard it again. A slow scrape, a shifted leaf. Not quick like an animal, more like something careful. Planning, I lowered my book and listened. The sound didn't stop. My breath felt heavy in my chest. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just a tree branch brushing the balcony. Then a shape moved behind the curtain, a shadow gliding across the soft yellow glow from outside. Not rushing, not panicking, just moving with quiet purpose. My book light snapped off instantly as I switched it off, and the room fell into darkness. My heart jumped into my throat. The shadow on the balcony grew taller. Taller than my mom, taller than anyone who should have been there. Whoever it was didn't want to be seen. That was obvious. I whispered to myself that they couldn't see me, but it didn't help. The figure lingered near the edge of the glass doors like they were listening for something. My heartbeat felt so loud I thought the person outside could hear it through the glass. Then I heard the thing that made my legs turn to ice. A soft click. A gentle rattle. Someone testing the handle to the glass door in my mom's room. My hand shook as I slid off my bed. I crept toward the door of my bedroom on shaking legs, cold wooden floor under my feet. I reached the door and turned the lock slowly, hoping it wouldn't make any noise. The handle outside rattled again. My throat tightened. Please stay locked. Please stay locked. I couldn't tell if it was locked. My mind wouldn't remember. I had been on the balcony that afternoon letting my blankets air out. Had I locked the door afterward? I couldn't think clearly enough to know. The handle stopped. Footsteps moved along the balcony again, soft and steady. Then the shadow reappeared behind my curtains, this time stopping directly outside my glass doors. The figure raised an arm. The shape of a hand reached for my handle. The handle turned. Once. Twice. Slowly. Slowly. It didn't open. Relief hit me so fast my eyes flooded with tears. Everything went silent again. I covered my mouth with both hands as I crouched on the floor. The person outside began pacing back and forth across the balcony, slow steps, heavy breathing, like they were deciding something. The air in my room grew thick and hot, even though it was cold outside. I wanted to run downstairs and grab the phone, but I couldn't move. If I stood up, they might see. If I made a sound, they might break the glass. Then he stopped walking. His voice slid through the quiet like a knife. I could just break the glass if I really wanted to. A chill shot through me so fast I thought I would faint. His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was calm, almost casual, like he had all the time in the world. Before I could even breathe, I saw headlights rolling across the street. A car slowed, turned, pulled into our driveway, my mom's car. She and my brother were back early. Tears spilled down my face as the shadow jerked away from the door. Something heavy hit the ground below the balcony. Then footsteps tore across the yard. Running, fleeing. When my mom came inside a minute later, I was still crouched on the floor, shaking too hard to speak. She rushed to me, grabbing me, trying to understand what happened. My voice cracked as I told her everything. She turned pale and immediately called the police. They searched the yard and the street. They didn't find him. But one neighbor reported seeing a dark pickup truck waiting near our house earlier. The same kind of truck connected to attempted abductions around my school. The same kind of truck the missing girl had been seen with. Police also asked strange questions. They asked about job ads, references, anyone new I had talked to recently. My stomach twisted as I told them about the couple from the childcare ad. When I showed the messages, the officers looked serious. They said the names weren't real. The references were fake. The number wasn't registered to any local service. They told my mom that someone had been using similar tactics to target teens in smaller coastal towns across Nova Scotia. That night, I slept in my mom's room with the door locked. But sleep didn't feel real anymore. Every rustle of the trees made me tense. Every car driving by made me feel like someone was still outside waiting. Weeks passed. I never slept with my curtains open again. I never relaxed in silence again. And even now, years later, I check every door twice, sometimes 3 times. The wind brushing against the balcony still makes my chest tighten, even though we don't live in that house anymore. Sometimes I lie awake thinking about the missing girl and her phone. How it kept receiving threats, even after she vanished. How someone used her accounts long after she was gone. I wonder if she ever answered a job ad too. I wonder if she ever opened a door when she shouldn't have. I wonder if the man who stood outside my window that night was the same one who took her. I wonder if he still remembers me. If he still knows my face. If he still knows my address. Silence used to feel peaceful to me. Now silence sounds like someone whispering that they could break the glass if they wanted to. I never understood how fear grows quietly until the year everything changed for me. The year my mind still circles back to, the year that swallowed my childhood whole. I wish I could say I imagined it, but I know I didn't because the heat still wakes me up at night as if I'm back inside that room again. My name is Braden, and back then my world still felt small and harmless. I lived in a quiet corner of Glace Bay in Nova Scotia, a place where fog clung to the streets early in the morning and people trusted each other more than they probably should have. My life was simple on the surface, even if something inside me already carried a soft, unsettled feeling I didn't know how to name. I didn't understand instincts then. I didn't know how to trust my gut. I only knew the rules drilled into me since I was little. Listen to adults. Don't stir up trouble. Don't make things bigger than they are. Don't be dramatic. I lived by those rules even when they didn't fit. That spring break, my parents packed us into the car and drove deeper into Cape Breton to stay in a small neighborhood in Glace Bay where my grandmother lived. Everyone called her Granny May. Her house sat at the end of a narrow road lined with old telephone poles and wind-worn houses, the kind of street where the windows all faced the ocean, but somehow none of the houses ever felt warm. The air still smelled cold, like frozen soil and damp wood that hadn't fully dried from winter. My younger cousin, a small and quiet girl named Lila Grant, came with us. She was 8, tiny, always hovering just behind my shoulder like my shadow. She trusted me more than she trusted anyone, and because of that trust, I felt like I had to be brave for her even when my stomach twisted with doubt. On our second day there, Granny May looked at us with her thin smile and said we could spend a few hours at the Seawind Activity Center, a place the town treated like the heart of everything. Inside it had a basketball court, a small pool, workout rooms, and other things kids weren't supposed to use, like the heated rooms for grown-ups. I answered yes instantly. Lila nodded fast, too eager to hide it. Granny May told us she'd drop us off and return in a while. Just stay inside, don't wander, and follow the staff. We agreed without a second thought. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss when we arrived, letting out a mix of chlorine, rubber floors, and something metallic beneath it, like old pipes breathing. The whole building felt emptier than I expected, quiet in a way that made every step echo. A few adults jogged on treadmills behind glass walls. One man lifted weights alone in a corner. The front desk attendant barely glanced at us as we walked past. For the first part of the day, everything felt normal. We ran around the court until our sneakers squealed and our legs burned. We shot baskets and missed almost everyone, and each time we laughed louder than the last. Eventually, the excitement faded and boredom crept in. Lila tugged my sleeve and asked if we could go to the pool. I shrugged and said sure. The pool area was empty except for one lifeguard sitting high in her chair. I'll call her Miss Harper. She wore a red sweatshirt and had her hair pulled into a tight bun, her face stiff and blank like she had forgotten how to smile. She didn't greet us or wave or even nod. She only watched. We splashed, played games, swam back and forth until our arms felt heavy. But after a while, even the water stopped being fun. Lila clung to the edge and said she was bored again. I looked up at the large wall clock above us and agreed. Then I asked who could hold their breath the longest. We stood in the shallow end under the clock. Instead of ducking fully underwater, we leaned forward with our faces in the pool, eyes open, noses burning from chlorine. I won the first round, then the second. On the last round, my chest felt tight, but I pushed myself anyway because I liked winning. That's when I felt a hand tap my shoulder. I jolted upright and grinned, thinking it was Lila giving up. But it wasn't her. It was Miss Harper, standing right beside me with a blank look. She told us in her flat voice to stop that because it wasn't safe. I apologized without thinking. She said if we didn't quit it, she would ask us to leave the pool. I nodded, feeling the embarrassment burn my cheeks. We were already cold and tired anyway, so I told Lila we should get dressed and go back to the court. As we started climbing out, Miss Harper stopped us. She asked if we wanted to warm up in the hot room. There was a sign nearby that clearly said adults only, no one under 18 allowed. I asked if she was serious. She nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. Lila looked up at me unsure. I hesitated for a moment, long enough to feel something sharp prickle in my chest, but I brushed it off. I nodded and said okay. She led us down a short hallway to a glass door framed by dark wood. Inside, everything was wood, the walls, the benches, even the floor. A clock hung above the door. A thermometer sat inside a plastic box on the wall. Miss Harper unlocked the door, motioned us inside, and stepped in behind us. She unlocked the plastic case around the thermometer and turned the dial with a twist of her wrist. We were too short to see the numbers, but I saw how far she turned it, her hand spinning it higher than I thought was normal. Lila whispered that it felt cold inside. Miss Harper told us it would warm up soon. Then she stepped back out and the door shut. I thought I heard a click, soft but unmistakable. The heat at first felt good. My skin warmed and the air felt gentle enough. We sat wrapped in our towels, leaning against the smooth wood. I watched the clock, telling Lila we would only stay a few minutes so we wouldn't get in trouble. A few minutes passed, then a few more. The air thickened. Breathing felt heavier. Lila said in a small voice that it was getting hot. I stood and tried the door handle. It didn't move. I tried again harder. Nothing. I told Lila maybe it was stuck, trying to sound calm, but my heart had already started beating too fast. She tried the handle too, but it didn't budge. We waited, hoping Miss Harper would return. 5 more minutes dragged by. The heat climbed fast, sharp, and oppressive, pushing against our skin like an angry hand. I walked to the glass door and tapped lightly at first. No reaction. I hit harder, telling her we were ready to leave. She sat at her chair, staring straight ahead, her posture unchanged. Lila joined me. We both pounded on the door. Our voices echoed off the wooden walls and felt like they dissolved before reaching her. The air burned my lungs. My eyes stung. Sweat poured down my face in steady streams. We sat back down, pulling our towels over our heads to block the heat, but even the towels quickly dried, making breathing feel harder. Lila whispered my name, her voice shaky and thin, telling me she didn't feel good. I looked at the clock again. Too much time had passed. My head spun from the heat. I stood, swaying, and stumbled toward the door again. I yelled until my throat felt like it was tearing. Miss Harper still didn't move. Then a thought slid into my mind, ice cold, almost whispering. She didn't forget us. She wasn't distracted. She wasn't busy. She wasn't making a mistake. She didn't plan to let us out. My stomach twisted violently. The heat made the wooden benches feel like they were burning through my skin. Lila lay on her stomach, barely moving, her eyes dull. I nudged her and begged her to stay awake even though my voice was barely a sound anymore. Then I saw someone walk past the glass outside, a man passing by, not staff, just a visitor from the fitness area. I slammed my hand against the door, using every bit of strength left in my body. The man stopped. He looked confused but concerned. He disappeared for a moment, then came back with Miss Harper. Relief rushed through me, but it stopped instantly when I saw her pull out her keys with a frown, as if opening the door was a hassle. She unlocked it just enough to crack it open. I grabbed Lila and shoved her toward the opening. The man tried to come in to help us, but Miss Harper tried to push the door shut again, blocking him with her arm. The man said, sounding unsure, that he thought we wanted out. I later learned his name was Michael Rowe. Miss Harper sighed like she was being annoyed for no reason, then opened the door fully. We stumbled out, gasping for air. We ran down the hallway without looking back. We didn't talk while we changed, our hands shaking so much it was hard to pull our clothes on. We didn't speak at all when Granny May picked us up. When we reached home, I told my parents everything while my throat still hurt from the heat. They looked at each other, then at me, then back at each other. My mom told me gently that I probably misunderstood, that heated rooms can feel way hotter than the real temperature. My dad added that sometimes fear makes memories feel bigger than what actually happened. I learned something that day, something that changed how I see people, something that taught me how easy it is for adults to dismiss a story just because it comes from a kid. I learned that disbelief can be sharper than any heat. I'm older now, and I still panic in closed, warm spaces. I still wake up sometimes gasping for breath with the feeling of wooden walls pressing in on me. I still wonder what would have happened if Michael Rowe hadn't walked past when he did. I still don't know what Miss Harper wanted that afternoon or why she did what she did. I only know one thing for certain, the thing I felt in my whole body that day. She didn't forget us, and she wasn't going to let us out. I never understood how silence can feel alive, like it can breathe on its own, until the weekend everything changed. I learned that quiet places can hide the loudest fear, and small towns can keep the darkest secrets. I grew up in Kentville, a small town tucked inside Nova Scotia's valley, a place where everyone knew everyone, and where the wind smelled like apples when the orchards were awake in the summer. My parents worked long hours at the local hospital, and I spent most evenings riding my bike through the narrow streets and gravel roads. Nothing scary ever happened in Kentville, at least not to people like us, or so my parents always said when I was younger. They used to tell me the town had safe bones, but bones can crack, and I learned that the hard way. My name is Drew, and the year it happened, I had just turned 17. I was finally old enough, in my parents' eyes, to stay home alone for a full weekend. They had a little cottage near Advocate Harbor, a long stretch of shoreline a bit over an hour from town, and they liked to spend summer weekends there to escape the heat. They said the air tasted cleaner by the ocean, that the fog made everything quiet in a nice way, not in a scary way. This time, they asked me if I wanted to join them, but I said no because my friend group was planning a hockey game behind the school and I had been bragging all week about how hard I could shoot now. My parents exchanged a look, that silent parent look that said they weren't sure I was ready for a full empty house, but they didn't want to argue. My mom finally sighed and said I was old enough. My dad nodded like it was decided. Still, my mom treated the situation like I was preparing for a storm. She filled the fridge with so much food that I thought she was feeding an entire hockey team. There were trays of mac and cheese, rotisserie chicken, slices of pie, bags of bread, and drinks that covered half a shelf. She shoved 2 folded bills into my hand even after I tried to give them back. "It's for pizza money," she said, "just in case you get tired of leftovers," and she squeezed my hand like she wasn't quite ready to let go. My dad loaded the last bags into the back of the car just before they left. He told me again that it would only be from Friday afternoon to Sunday afternoon. "You'll barely notice we left," he said while closing the trunk. I nodded and told him I would be fine, even though my stomach felt strange, like the feeling right before jumping into cold water. They hugged me at the doorway, reminded me to lock the doors, and promised to call once they reached the cottage. I watched the car roll down the driveway, the gravel crunching under the tires, and I stood in the doorway until they turned at the corner and disappeared behind the maple trees. The quiet that followed felt heavy, thick, almost like it had weight. The house felt too still. I shook off the weird feeling, shut the front door, and tried to act like it was any normal day. That first night felt almost unreal. No footsteps upstairs, no murmured TV shows in the living room, no one calling my name to remind me about chores. I played games on my Xbox until my eyes stung, and I ordered wings from a place in town that always delivered late. I sat on my bed, half laughing at a video, and eventually drifted asleep with the controller warm in my hands. The last time I blinked at the screen, it was close to 2:17 a.m., but I didn't care because no one was around to tell me off. When I finally woke up, sunlight was blasting through the blinds like someone was pointing a flashlight straight at my face. My phone said it was already past 11 in the morning. I groaned because I had planned to meet a few friends to play street hockey around noon. If I didn't hurry, I would be late, and they would tease me endlessly. Still half asleep, I shuffled into the bathroom, turned the shower on as hot as it could go, and stepped inside. The steam filled the room quickly, covering the mirror in a cloudy sheet. When my parents were home, showers were short and rushed, but now I took my time, leaning against the tile, letting the heat wash across my shoulders. I scrolled on my phone, flipping between videos and random posts, feeling free in a way I wasn't used to. That freedom ended with a single sound. It came from downstairs, a long creaking groan, drawn out like something was forcing its way open. Our house was old, built before my grandparents were even born, and the doors always complained when they moved. The front door groaned when opening in the summer heat, and the back door made an even worse sound because the frame swelled when the air grew heavy. It was impossible for someone to enter quietly. The noise sliced through the hiss of the running water, sharp enough to make my heart jump. I froze under the spray, shampoo still in my hair, trying to tell myself I misheard, but the sound had been too clear, too real. I stood there listening, water rolling down my face. No voices, no footsteps, nothing else. I swallowed hard and whispered that it was probably the wind, but the words felt weak even to my own ears. I shut off the water and stepped out, grabbing a towel and pressing it against my skin as I listened again. Every tiny sound felt louder. The drip of water, the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs, even my own heartbeat. After a few minutes of silence, a more reasonable thought pushed into my mind. My parents must have come home early, maybe because the weather turned bad near the coast, maybe because they forgot something important. It made more sense than anything else. I wrapped the towel around my waist and cracked the bathroom door open. The hallway stretched quietly in front of me, sunlit and empty. I took slow steps to the stairs, gripping the railing so tightly my knuckles went pale. Each step creaked in the same familiar rhythm, but something about it felt wrong, like I was walking into someone else's house. Halfway down, a weird sensation hit me, a pressure in my chest that told me something wasn't right. It wasn't a sound or a shadow or anything clear. It was just a feeling, the kind you get when you step into a dark room and sense someone watching. I stopped with one foot on the next stair, breathing carefully. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I said it under my breath, trying to act brave. "It's just me overthinking," I whispered, and I almost laughed at how jumpy I was. This wasn't a horror movie, and I wasn't the unlucky character who walks into danger for no reason. I made myself walk the last 2 stairs and turned into the kitchen. Someone stood there, only a few feet away. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood in the middle of the kitchen like he had been waiting for me. The first thing I noticed was his posture. His arms were twisted backward, rotated in a way no joint should allow, elbows slightly bent, hands hovering behind him like he was frozen mid-stretch. It looked painful, impossible, unnatural. He was taller than me by a lot, wearing old sneakers covered in dirt, dark pants, and a hoodie zipped halfway up. His face was stretched into a wide smile, a fixed grin that looked carved into his skin. The smile didn't reach his eyes, and his eyes looked too bright, too focused. For a moment, my brain couldn't process the sight. Everything went blank. No thoughts, no screams, just a sharp, buzzing panic. Then instinct burst through. Before I realized what I was doing, I stepped forward and swung. It wasn't a clean punch, more like a desperate hit fueled by pure terror. My knuckles cracked against his jaw, and I heard the snap of his teeth slamming together. He stumbled, losing that unnatural smile for a second as he hit the counter behind him. I didn't wait for his reaction. I bolted. I sprinted up the stairs, the towel slipping from my waist and falling somewhere on the steps. My heart hammered so violently I felt it in my ears. I flew into my bedroom and slammed the door shut, twisting the lock with shaking fingers. I grabbed my desk chair and wedged it under the doorknob before collapsing onto the floor. My hands trembled so much I nearly dropped my phone twice while dialing. When the operator answered, my voice came out in a broken whisper. I told them someone was in my house, that my parents weren't home, that he was standing in my kitchen smiling at me. The operator kept her voice calm, asking for my address, asking if I was safe inside a room. Then the light under my door disappeared. My entire body froze. A shadow blocked the thin strip of brightness under the doorframe. Someone was standing just outside my room. The operator asked if I was still there, but I couldn't speak. I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from making any sound. The shadow shifted slowly, sliding back and forth like the man outside was adjusting his feet. Waiting, listening. My heart thudded against my ribs hard enough to hurt. Even breathing felt dangerous. Time became strange. Minutes stretched like hours. The shadow stayed, unmoving except for slow shifts that made the floor creak softly. I pressed myself against the wall, phone clutched tightly against my chest, watching the faint line of light as if everything depended on it. Then, suddenly, the light returned. The shadow stepped away. Footsteps moved down the hallway, slow and unhurried, almost casual. I didn't move. I didn't breathe until the footsteps faded entirely. When I finally heard the pounding on the front door and the voices calling out police, something inside me cracked. I broke into shaking sobs. When the officers reached my room and I opened the door, my knees gave out and one of them grabbed my shoulders to keep me from falling. They searched the house top to bottom, room by room, closet by closet, basement to attic. The man was gone. No footprints, no forced entry, no fingerprints, no broken locks. The only signs of anything wrong were my towel on the stairs and a faint smear on the kitchen counter where he must have hit it when I punched him. My parents drove home that same night, speeding so fast my mom later admitted she barely remembered the drive. After that weekend, they never left me alone again, not even for a few hours. But the strange part, the part I didn't tell the police, were the things I remembered from the weeks before that day. A guidance counselor at school had mentioned that several students dropped out suddenly after getting offers of easy cash from strangers. Seasonal farm workers near the orchard slept in trailers with windows screwed shut, and people whispered about seeing shapes through the plastic blinds at night. And once, when I waited for the bus, I saw a pair of tiny children's shoes hidden beneath the bench, placed neatly side by side like someone had left them on purpose. No one ever claimed them. Sometimes I think about those things, about the man with the twisted arms, about the smile that didn't move. Sometimes, late at night when the house feels too quiet, I swear I can hear that long, familiar groan of the back door, the sound of wood being pushed open slowly. And sometimes, when I wake up in the dark, I see a shadow under my door for just a second before it fades. But the police never found him, and that is the part that still follows me. I had no idea those first breaths of soft air would be the last peaceful ones I would ever take. I was finishing my final year of college, worn out in the strange, heavy way only students near the end understand, and everything in my future felt blurry and uncertain. Work, money, where I would live, all of it felt like fog, but for one short week, none of that mattered. I only cared about getting away from everything, and that is how I ended up driving toward Amherst, Nova Scotia, a small town I had never seen before but would never forget again. My best friend, who I will call Smith, had invited a handful of us to spend spring break at a small seaside condo his uncle owned near the edge of town. Amherst was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of place where the roads seemed to stop and stare back at you, where the woods pressed close against the highway, where the houses looked older than the people living in them. The condo itself sat in a lonely row of pale buildings facing the water, their balconies slightly rusted, their walls stained from storms. Inside, it had little more than a beaten couch, a wobbly table, and a few chairs that did not match, but to us it felt like a break from everything. I had grown up poor, in a town even smaller than Amherst, where my father worked in an old metal factory and my mother cleaned houses. That factory shaped most of my childhood. Machines clattering, men shouting, strange safety posters everywhere, and screens, cold-blowing screens used to test people for obedience instead of skill, asking quiet questions like, do you follow orders, or do you think you deserve more, or would you argue with a supervisor? I failed one of those tests when I turned 18, and the factory never called me back. My father said I should be grateful. He said the factory swallowed people whole. I did not know that the place waiting for me in Amherst would try to do the same. When Smith drove us north, he gripped the steering wheel tight, telling us to be careful in the condo, not to break anything, not to make trouble in town. He said his uncle almost never used the place and trusted him with it. Another friend of ours, Damien, laughed and told him to relax. But Smith had always been a little wound up, afraid of accidents and consequences. It was strange looking back now, because the disaster that happened later felt like it found the only person in our group who always tried to avoid danger. We got to the condo at dusk. The sky was a strange blend of orange and deep purple, and the sea stretched out like a sheet of dark glass. The place smelled empty inside, but the open balcony door brought in the steady voice of the waves. Someone grabbed the first handful of drinks before we even brought in our luggage, and soon everyone was cheering, celebrating the end of a long year. Smith barely drank at first. He stood near the balcony, looking down the row of condos as if expecting someone to appear. I teased him gently, telling him he deserved to relax for once, not knowing how much those words would twist inside me later. Once Smith started drinking, he stopped caring about limits. Beer turned into something stronger, music grew louder, and soon the place filled with warm bodies and half-shouted jokes. Empty cans rolled across the floor. Someone knocked over a chair. Our group sprawled out like tired animals, slipping in and out of conversations. Smith changed fast. He went from quiet to wild. He gulped down drinks like he was trying to erase something. I knew he carried weight from his own family too, a rough father, a missing brother, but I never asked for details. That night I wished I had. By around 1 or maybe 2 in the morning, most of us were drifting off or staring into our phones. The music faded into a muffled hum. My head buzzed. My thoughts felt slow, and that was when Smith suddenly leaped from the couch, his face flushed, his eyes foggy. He asked why we were acting like the night was over. Someone groaned. Someone else said it was too late. But Smith snatched up leftover drinks and pushed them into people's hands, telling everyone to get up, telling us we were wasting the trip. He said we should go to the beach. The ocean was only steps away from the condos. There were no streets between us, no crowds, just the sand and the cold black water. Someone asked if the beach was closed at night. Smith just laughed, waving off the question, stumbling a little as he pulled at his shirt. We ran out into the night without thinking, barefoot, half awake, half drunk. The moon was gone, hidden by clouds, and the beach felt too dark. The only light came from the far-off glow of other condos. The water was pitch black, like a mouth waiting for something. Smith yelled something wild, and a couple of our friends threw off their clothes and waded into the freezing water. I followed because I did not want him alone out there. The moment the waves hit my legs, I felt how strong they were. The water pulled at me, cold enough to sting my bones. We walked out until the sand dropped away, and then Smith kept going. I told him to stop. He did not turn back. He started swimming out into the dark. I pushed forward, trying to keep him in sight, but each wave rose like a wall, blocking him from me. The water churned around me, my stomach twisted. The alcohol made me dizzy. I tried to call his name, but the wind carried my voice away. I swam harder. Each second felt longer. The cold wrapped around my chest, and my arms began to go numb. I shouted his name again, but all I heard was the loud beating of my own heart in my ears. Then I saw nothing, no shadow, no splash, no sign of him. Panic hit me all at once. I turned back toward the faint voices of our friends. By the time my feet found sand again, I collapsed forward, half crawling onto the shore, spitting out water, coughing so hard my ribs hurt. The others huddled together, sobering fast, their faces pale in the dark. I asked where Smith was. They said they thought he was with me. We ran to the pile of clothes on the sand. His were still there, untouched. That moment felt like something broke open in the world. I felt everything inside me drop. We scattered along the shore, calling his name, shining small phone lights over the dark surface. Someone called the police with shaking hands. The officers arrived calm and steady, asking questions that felt unreal and distant. They told us there was nothing to do until sunrise, that the tide was strong at this part of the coast, that night searches rarely helped. Their words sounded like they were coming from underwater. We stayed there shivering in the sand, waiting for a miracle. But instead, something else came. A wave rolled in, slow and heavy, and brought Smith with it. His body hit the shore like a piece of driftwood. He did not look like the person I had known my whole life. He did not look like anyone. Someone screamed. I do not know who. All I remember is the smell of the sea again, sharp and undeniable, and the sudden cold realization that our spring break had ended in a way none of us could take back. That should have been the end, but Amherst had other plans. During the days that followed, I stayed in town because the police told us not to leave until statements were done. The air felt wrong. The streets felt too empty, and something strange kept happening. Every morning, I woke early and wandered out to escape my pounding thoughts. Each day, I saw new missing posters taped to poles and walls. Different faces, different ages. Some looked recent, some looked older. But what bothered me most was that each night, when I went back to the same spots, the posters were gone, not torn, not weather damaged, just removed completely. One afternoon, when the sky hung low and gray, I got stuck walking back toward the condo when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw a man standing near the road, tall, wrapped in a faded coat, his eyes hollow. He asked me if I was heading south toward the main highway. I said I was not. He nodded, glanced down the road, and whispered that he needed to get out of Amherst as fast as he could. I asked what he meant, but before he could answer, a van rolled slowly up the road, its engine humming like a growl. The man froze. The side door of the van slid open. Two people looked out at him, not smiling, not speaking. Traffic suddenly bottlenecked near the crossing, cars filling the narrow street. The hitchhiker used that moment to slip between vehicles and ran. He vanished into the woods. The van tried to follow, honking, swerving, but the traffic jam trapped it. I watched through the window of a nearby car as the people inside the van stared at me, unblinking, as if memorizing my face. That was when I realized Amherst was not just a quiet town, it was a trap. Later that week, I tried clearing my head by walking near an old building on the edge of town, a place that looked abandoned. The sign outside had once said something about a factory, though the letters were too faded to read well. The front door was cracked open. I stepped closer and saw a faint glow inside. Screens. Rows of screens facing old metal chairs. They flickered with soft questions. Things about trust. Things about obedience. Things about following orders. The same kind of tests from my childhood. The ones I had failed. The ones my father hated. That was when I heard footsteps behind me and ran before I could look back. Day after day, the town felt worse. The locals watched us like they knew something we did not. The woods rustled at night even when there was no wind. And every time I walked near the shore, I swore I saw someone standing far out in the waves, facing the land, waiting. By the time the police let us leave, I felt like the town itself was watching. We packed our bags in silence and drove south without speaking. But even once we were miles away, I felt the ocean smell still clinging to me. The memory of Smith dragging me into that final night still stuck behind my ribs. And the image of the factory screens and the van and the missing posters haunted every quiet moment. I never returned to Amherst. But sometimes, when I dream, I see the waves again, black and endless. I see someone walking out toward me. And I hear the soft echo of those factory screens asking if I follow orders, if I trust what I am told, if I understand what happens to people who do not. I always wake before I learn the answer. When I was little, living in a small house outside Bridgewater, Nova Scotia, I learned early that fear didn't need footsteps or shadows to exist. It could sit in your chest like a cold stone, warning you before anything even happened. When I was 8, a stranger hammered at our front door long after midnight, yelling my real name as if he owned it. My mother shoved me into the laundry room, whispering for me not to breathe, her voice cracking like thin ice. Another time, a man showed up with a knife, screaming that we had someone he wanted. Wrong house, the police said later, but that didn't undo the way he twisted our doorknob until my mother thought it would snap. These things stain you, and no matter how old you get, small noises can make your pulse spike. Small shadows can feel too alive. So when November came that year, with its early darkness and bitter winds sweeping across the Lahave River, I wasn't a normal 19-year-old anymore. I was careful, overly alert, the kind of person who double-checked locks even when someone was still inside the house. My friends joked that Bridgewater was peaceful, that nothing ever really happened here, but I never felt safe in quiet towns. They made danger easier to hear. That evening, the sky went black way too fast, and by 7:45 p.m., the street outside our home looked swallowed by shadow. I'd just trudged inside after closing at the grocery store, the cold still biting my fingers. Our house sat at the edge of a wooded patch where animals wandered in and out, but sometimes the noises didn't sound like animals. I dropped my shoes by the door and went straight upstairs to my room at the end of the hall, overlooking a backyard full of tall grass and a rusted old shed. I opened my laptop, played some random YouTube video I wasn't really paying attention to, and stretched out on my bed. Downstairs, I heard my mom collecting her keys. "Going to pick up your sister from work," she called up, "and maybe fill the car. You want anything?" "No, I'm fine," I said. "Don't lock yourself in," she joked weakly. "I won't," I lied. Her car rolled down the driveway, fading into the wind. Suddenly, the house felt too quiet, like someone had turned down the world. But I told myself it was fine. It always had to be fine. About 15 minutes passed. I heard a noise downstairs, a soft shuffle, then a dull thump. I didn't care at first. Our cat had a habit of knocking things over when his bowl was empty. I reached beside my leg to pat him, but my hand touched only blankets. He wasn't next to me. Slowly, I leaned forward. He sat stiff at the end of the bed, staring toward my door, his ears pinned back. The wind rattled outside. The video kept playing. Something inside me tightened like a fist. Another noise. A hard bang. Then something metallic hitting the floor. My stomach dropped. "It's the cat," I whispered, but even I didn't believe that anymore. Something clattered again, sharper this time, like keys hitting tile, then scraping, then falling again. My brain tried to make it make sense. "My sister got off early," I whispered, probably mad about something. But no footsteps followed, no frustrated stomping, no voice yelling her usual complaints. It didn't sound like her at all. The noises were too frantic, too forceful. I pushed my laptop aside and opened my bedroom door just an inch. The hallway was dark, the air strangely cold. I stepped out, the floor creaking loudly under my feet, too loudly in a house that felt like it was holding its breath. I sat halfway down the staircase and listened. The sounds were coming from the kitchen, the door facing the backyard, the mudroom we rarely used. I knew the rhythm of people in my house. I knew the way my sister banged cabinets. I knew how my mom shuffled when she searched for receipts and how the cat tapped the bowl when hungry. This wasn't that. This sounded like someone trying to get inside. My heartbeat thudded so hard I thought the whole staircase would shake. Cold sweat gathered behind my knees. The air felt thick and wrong, like the house itself wanted me to hide. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining things, that this was just leftover fear from childhood nights when strange men screamed my name from the driveway. But then something crashed. Running footsteps tore away from the back door, fast and heavy like someone had been crouched close and fled the second I approached. I jumped, nearly falling down the stairs, then forced myself toward the kitchen, even though every part of my body begged me to go back. The kitchen door came into view and the icy air hit me hard. The plastic cat flap wasn't there anymore. It had been ripped off. Torn. Pieces lay scattered like broken teeth on the floor. My knees went weak. It wasn't an animal. Something in me wanted to deny it, but deep down, something older than reason whispered the truth. Someone tried to come in. I staggered back, trembling so hard I couldn't control it. My phone slipped in my shaking hands as I called my mom. No answer. I tried again. Finally, someone picked up. My sister's voice, annoyed, yelling over highway noise. "What? Are you home?" I choked. "What? What? No. Why? Please, just tell me the truth. Are you home right now?" My voice cracked. "No," she snapped. "We're still 5 minutes from the store. What's going on?" "There's someone here," I blurted, the words falling out before I could stop them. "What do you mean, someone?" "The cat flap," I sobbed. "They ripped it off. They're trying to come in." Her tone changed instantly, turning sharp and scared. "Call the police now." I hung up and dialed emergency services. My fingers barely worked. I ran upstairs with my cat scrambling behind me, almost tripping me as I shut myself inside my room. I pressed my back against the door, trying to stay quiet, my breath shaking uncontrollably. The dispatcher spoke softly, trying to calm me. "Stay in your room. Help is coming." But then it happened. Footsteps downstairs. Not hesitant, not curious. Walking, moving, confident. I froze, covering my mouth with both hands. I could hear the creak of the floorboards, the shift of weight, the faint murmur of voices. 2 people maybe? 3? They were inside the house. They were inside. My throat closed up. Horror soaked into me like ice water. I whispered into the phone. "They came back. They're inside." I could feel the dispatcher tighten, even through the line. "Stay quiet. Stay hidden. Officers are almost there." But fear didn't listen. Entire. Something inside me wanted to scream, or break the window, or run into the woods barefoot if I had to. Anything to get away from whoever was roaming my downstairs. The footsteps moved through the house. I heard a drawer open sharply. Another door. A whisper I couldn't quite make out. A low laugh that didn't sound human at all in the stillness. I pressed myself into the corner beside my dresser. My cat crawled under the bed, his fur sticking straight out. Lights flooded the driveway, voices outside, car doors slamming, flashing red and blue seeping through my bedroom blinds. My legs gave out, police swarmed the house. My mother and sister rushed in behind them, but the intruders were gone. They had vanished like smoke. Officers checked everything. When they examined the back door, the truth came out, sharp and horrifying. The spare keys we kept inside on the counter had been their target. Someone had shoved a broken wooden handle part of a snapped broom through the cat flap hole and knocked the keys down. They had been trying to hook and pull them out, trying to unlock the door from the inside. And when the broom handle broke, it snapped the inner part of the door handle too, jamming the lock. That accident was the only thing that kept them from getting inside before I walked into the kitchen. If that hadn't happened, they would have come in silently. No crash, no running, no warning. and I would have been alone upstairs, unaware, while they opened the door. Police asked questions, but I had none of the answers anyone wanted. No one knew who they were, how long they'd watched our home, how many times they might have tested the door before this night. The wind outside howled like something hungry. Bridgewater suddenly felt too small, too quiet, too dark. I didn't sleep in that house for weeks. My mind replayed everything, every bang, every creak, every breath I took hiding in my room. Even months later, small noises made me freeze. I checked locks dozens of times before bed. Sometimes I woke hearing footsteps that weren't real, or maybe they were. Fear doesn't leave you easily. It lingers in corners, in memories, in the silent spaces between breaths. But that wasn't the end. 3 weeks later, a girl renting a room across town posted an ad looking for a new roommate. She had asked applicants to photocopy their IDs before touring the room. Some tenants later said their IDs vanished, their files missing from their bags. She claimed she never received anything. People whispered about it, saying she had a finished basement labeled music practice only she could access, a room no one ever saw, with soundproof walls and a lock on the outside. Around the same time, a local rideshare driver mentioned someone giving strange pickup instructions every week, repeating the same coded lines like a script, always ending at a wooded drop-off point near our neighborhood. Everyone laughed it off, but I didn't. Because some nights, even long after we fixed the back door, even after winter melted into spring, I heard faint tapping near the kitchen, soft scraping against the frame. A whisper sliding under the cold wind, almost like someone promising they'd come back when I least expected. Almost like someone who had once reached through the darkness toward my keys, toward my door, toward me, and every time my chest tightened, and I remembered the truth I learned young. Doors don't always keep people out. Sometimes they only slow them down. I never imagined fear could settle into my bones so quietly that I wouldn't notice until it was too late. All my life I felt comfortable in ordinary places with ordinary people, and nothing dangerous ever happened around me. I lived in warm homes, in peaceful neighborhoods, the kind where porch lights glowed like friendly stars. Maybe that is why I ignored the warning signs when they first appeared, because real danger is supposed to feel loud and obvious, not soft and creeping like fog drifting in from the harbor. My name is Mara, and long before I moved to Yarmouth, I thought of myself as the kind of person who stayed calm in the dark. Not brave exactly, but steady, the one who could shake off strange noises or odd moments without letting my heart jump into my throat. That confidence came from how I grew up. Back then, I lived in a place where nights felt safe and small problems were the worst anyone expected. My family kept a quiet life. My childhood summer afternoons were filled with the hum of insects and the smell of pine trees, and fear was something that happened in stories, not reality. I guess that made me soft, even if I did not realize it, because when I moved with my boyfriend Kellen to that little duplex at the edge of Yarmouth, I did not sense anything wrong. I did not question the cheap rent, or the tall wall behind the house, or the backyard gate heavy enough to keep out a bear. I just assumed we had been lucky. Kellen worked as a night shift grocery stocker, the kind of job that left him exhausted and often coming home at strange hours. I didn't mind. We had only lived there for 5 weeks and were still unpacking boxes and figuring out where everything belonged. The place still felt borrowed, like we were guests in someone else's home. On the night it happened, Kellen told me he would be late, maybe very late, because they were rearranging the entire store. I didn't care much because I was tired and just wanted a quiet night. I kicked off my shoes, ordered takeout, and curled on the couch with the TV low enough to be background noise. The kind of night where your brain shuts off and everything feels soft and warm. The first sound came around 7:45 p.m., a faint metallic tick from somewhere downstairs. I paused the TV and listened, but nothing followed. I whispered "old house" to myself, not sure if I meant the sound or the strange weight that settled in the air. I shrugged it off and scrolled through my phone, forgetting I had run out of credit earlier that day. No calls, no text, no data. The screen felt like a dead thing in my hand. It should have bothered me more. Time slipped by in its lazy way until a little after 9 when I heard it again. This time, it wasn't a tick. It was a slow scrape, like metal dragged gently across something hollow. The kind of sound someone makes when they don't want to be noticed. My heart thumped faster than my thoughts could catch up. I sat up, muted the TV, and waited for another sound. Nothing came. I checked the front door, the deadbolt locked tight, the chain still hanging the way I left it. I peered through the peephole. The porch was empty and the street outside looked like a painting of stillness. The back door was locked too. Everything looked normal. I told myself I was just tired, just jumpy, but the air felt thick in a way I didn't like. I grabbed my laptop and went upstairs, leaving the house dark except for one small lamp. The upstairs felt different than usual, like the shadows were listening. I turned on soft music and tried focusing on my laptop screen. That was when I heard it again. A tiny rattle, almost polite, coming from downstairs. I froze with my fingers hovering above the keyboard. The sound stopped as if it had felt me noticing. I waited, listening so hard that the ringing in my ears became louder than anything else. After a few minutes, I convinced myself to turn the music back on. A little after 10, the sound came again, worse than before. A long, slow screech like steel sliding against steel in a careful hidden motion. The fear that hit me felt sharp and cold, nothing like the soft unease from earlier. I snapped my laptop shut and stood with my stomach twisting. I crept into the hallway, the wood cold under my bare feet, and leaned toward the stairs. That was when I heard the whispering. Two male voices, low, quiet, almost casual, but close enough that the words brushed against the edges of the house like fingers looking for weakness. They weren't inside the house. They were just outside. My mouth dried instantly. I slowly moved toward the back of the house. The bedroom, bathroom, and small office formed an L shape around the enclosed yard, the yard surrounded by a tall brick wall with a heavy wooden gate opening into a narrow alley. From the bedroom window, I peered into the darkness below. The yard looked still, the gate just a darker rectangle against the wall. Then I heard one of the whispers again, louder this time, as if the men had moved closer to the gate. "Yeah, this is it." Another voice answered, "Seen the gear, we're set." I dropped to my knees so fast my palms burned on the floor. My breathing turned shaky. They weren't passing by. They weren't lost. They were here for my house. I crawled to the wardrobe and grabbed the heavy iron rod we found stuffed in there when we moved in. We had laughed about it once, calling it a relic from someone with strange hobbies. But now, it felt like my only lifeline. I kept the lights off. I didn't want them to know where I was. My fingers trembled so badly that I had trouble gripping the rod and my thoughts spun in circles. I moved into the bathroom, climbed onto the ledge beneath the tiny window overlooking the alley, and cracked it open just enough to hear. "She's alone," one of them muttered. "Lights go out soon," the other whispered back. My chest tightened so painfully that I had to bite into my sleeve to keep from making a sound. They had been watching long enough to know Kellen's schedule. They had noticed the dark windows. They had studied us. A sudden bang slammed into the gate. I nearly screamed but forced myself to stay silent. Another hit shook the gate. I could see its shadow jerking against the wall through the window. It wouldn't hold. I could feel it. I backed away, gripping the rod like it was glued to my hands, thinking about useless plans. Hide under the bed, lock myself in the bathroom, jump from the window and run. None of it made sense. Then, suddenly, light, bright, blinding light burst across the yard. For a second, my mind broke open with the worst idea they'd found me, but then I heard barking. A big dog, furious, loud. A floodlight from the neighbor's house snapped on, pouring harsh brightness over the alley. Someone on the other side shouted, a short, sharp call that cut through the night. One of the men hissed something angry. "Move." Footsteps thundered away down the alley, fast and stumbling. I couldn't move. I sat frozen on the tiled floor, pressed against the wall, the iron rod heavy across my shaking legs. I stayed that way for hours until Kellen came home a little past 2:17 a.m., tired and smelling like cardboard and floor cleaner. He found me sitting there, barely blinking. In the morning, the truth showed itself. The gate hung crooked, one hinge ripped loose. Deep scratches bit into the wood around the lock. The metal latch was twisted as if someone had forced it with tools. It looked like a half-finished break-in attempt, the kind we had interrupted by accident. For days, I kept thinking the same terrible thing. If that neighbor hadn't turned on their light, I don't know what would have happened. But the story didn't end there. Yarmouth is a small town, and small towns have histories hidden under soft layers of quiet. At first, I didn't notice the pattern. But then, small things started falling into place, each one making the night feel darker. A week later, I overheard ferry staff near the docks talking about something strange. They mentioned seeing the same man escorting different silent girls every month. Always the same man, always different girls, and not one of them ever spoke. The staff said the girls looked numb, the way people look when something is very wrong, but they aren't allowed to show it. That man always paid in cash. Always left before sunrise, always kept his head down. The words sank into me like cold water. Then I learned from a friend who worked at the docks that the cameras there had a strange pattern too. They showed unmarked vans pulling up only on foggy nights, never in clear weather. The vans parked by the pier, idled for a few minutes, then disappeared into the mist as if waiting for someone or something. No plates, no drivers visible, always fog. The police shrugged it off, calling it bad footage. And last, a clerk at one of the small hotels near the waterfront told Kellen something he repeated to me later. Someone had booked rooms under different names, different IDs, different addresses, but all written in the same handwriting. Always a man traveling with a girl, always late check-ins, always early checkouts, no voices, no eye contact, no smiles. Names changing, but the story repeating. The same uneasy pattern creeping through the town like a shadow spreading from the water. I couldn't help connecting all of it. The whispers, the break-in, the quiet girls, the fog vans, the broken gate, the man who changed names like clothes. I stopped sleeping right after that. Every creak made my pulse jump. Every gust of wind made me glance at the gate. I knew something was wrong in Yarmouth, something that hid behind ordinary days and empty streets and the soft crash of waves, something that moved carefully through the fog, watching for houses where only one light shone. The town felt smaller, the nights felt colder. The alleys felt deeper, and I realized something else, something worse. Those men hadn't been looking for a random house, they had been looking for me. How long had they watched? How long had I ignored the feeling of being observed? How many nights had they mapped the street, the yard, the empty spaces? One evening, near dusk, I walked by the gate and noticed something I had missed before. A small mark carved into the wood near the bottom, faint, like someone had dragged a nail across it. A shape that looked almost like a small crooked arrow pointing the way. I didn't know if it was new or if it had been there all along. I felt watched again. Kellen tried comforting me, but he didn't understand the feeling of being hunted by something quiet, patient, and familiar with shadows. He didn't hear the footsteps outside at night or the whispers that drifted on the wind like echoes. A few days later, the neighbor with the floodlight left town. I never learned why. Their house went dark, and the alley behind our yard felt completely exposed. The fog rolled in heavier than usual, muffling every sound in a way that made the night feel thick and alive. That was when I started hearing the scrape again. Not every night, not always close, but enough to make me know they were still out there. Enough to make me sit awake with the iron rod on my lap, listening for footsteps. And every time I lay awake, I wondered if one of those silent girls had once lived in a house like mine, thinking she was safe. Some nights I dream of the gate breaking open. Other nights I hear the whisper, "She's alone," drift across the yard. I can no longer tell which sounds are real and which ones my mind creates because it doesn't know how to feel safe anymore. Every night feels like waiting, waiting for whispers, waiting for the light to fail, waiting for the moment they decide to come back. Because danger in Yarmouth doesn't vanish, it circles. And sometimes the only reason you survive one night is because someone else happened to wake up at the right moment. I don't know who will wake up next time. And deep down, I fear no one will.